I moved states on a Tuesday because Tuesdays don't demand announcements. I packed my car the night before, left my apartment keys in a plain envelope, and pointed the hood east just as the bakery on my block switched on its lights. By noon, I had crossed a border that existed on maps, but not, apparently, in my family's imagination. My phone didn't ring. No one asked where I was. I glanced in the rear view and realized the strangest part of leaving was this. I didn't feel chased, only released. Before we continue, please subscribe my channel for such more stories and let us know where you're listening in the comments. People think disappearances are loud. A slammed door, a note on the table, storm clouds of drama. Mine was an exhale. I had been fading for so long that driving away felt like finishing something my family started years ago. I'm Elena Marlowe, eldest daughter of Richard and Helen Marlowe, older sister to Vanessa, who arrived 2 summers after me and learned early how to turn a room toward herself. In our house, praise wasn't a resource to be shared. It was a current that flowed predictably to the same shore. When I brought home straight A's, my father would pat my shoulder and say, dependable as ever. When Vanessa landed a minor role in a school play, there were flowers in vases and a video posted to the neighborhood Facebook group with 3 exclamation points. I learned the arithmetic quickly. Reliability multiplied by invisibility equals taken for granted. Not everyone played by that math. Evelyn Marlowe, my grandmother, kept a jar of mismatched buttons and quiet dignity on her sewing table. She saw me the way needle sees thread, useful, necessary, strong. When she hugged me hello, she included my name, as if to stitch it down so it wouldn't blow off the page. Write things down, she'd say, sliding me a little notebook. A mind like yours deserves a witness. I did, not diary entries exactly, more like ledgers of truth. Day, event, who said what actually happened. Receipts, in ink. By high school, I was the family's human solution. Printer jam? Elena. Missing permission slip? Elena. Car out of gas because Vanessa borrowed it on fumes? Elena will fix it. The compliments were efficient and empty. You're our rock, my mother would say, which really meant you will absorb all the weight so the rest of us don't have to notice it exists. Vanessa learned a different language. She could tilt her head and make worry look elegant. Teachers forgave her late assignments because she promised sparkle later. Friends forgave her half-truths because she was fun at parties. My parents forgave everything because she's sensitive. I was sensitive too, but in a way that didn't perform, quiet stings that didn't interrupt dinner. At university, I majored in the thing I had been doing for my family since I could hold a pen: communications, strategy, brand voice, narratives that hold. It felt like building scaffolding for other people's buildings, which suited me. I liked knowing how things stood. My professors praised my clarity, my internships turned into offers, and my notebooks filled with neat rows. Goal, audience, message, outcome. Somewhere between deadlines, I understood the tenderness of power, how naming a thing shapes it, how telling the story first is the same as owning it. After graduation, I returned to the same city to be near my grandmother, who had begun misplacing her glasses on top of her head. I rented a small apartment with a sink that sighed and a view of a brick wall that turned rose at sunrise. On Sundays, I visited Evelyn, replaced batteries in her smoke detector, listened to the hush of her old stories. When she dozed, I wrote in the notebook she'd given me, columns of truth, a way to keep my own edges from blurring. At home, nothing had changed, and everything had. Vanessa had taken an entry-level job in a glossy firm and began speaking in borrowed headlines. At dinners, she would present other people's ideas as if unveiling a magic trick. I recognized some of the phrasing, my phrasing, from late-night phone calls where she'd ask, "How would you frame this?" I didn't mind at first. Sharing language had always felt like the kindest intimacy I could offer. Then she stopped asking and kept taking. The week before I moved, I tested a theory. I scheduled my mail to forward, gave my landlord notice, and told only 2 people, Tessa and Lila, my kindest conspirators from college who had made a sport of returning my borrowed light. Do it clean, Tessa said, practical as ever. Tell them when you're ready. Lila slid a plant across my counter like a benediction. For a windowsill that faces better mornings. On Monday, I texted the family group chat a photo of a sunrise, no caption. A habit of mine, a small offering. The 3 typing dots appeared and vanished. My mother sent a heart. My father sent a thumbs up. Vanessa sent nothing, though later she posted the same sunrise to her story with the caption chasing light. Tuesday I left. The highway unfurled like a sentence I didn't have to edit. I passed billboards for the life I was supposed to want. Bigger closets, flatter stomachs, a new development called The Meadows that looked like copy and paste hope. I stopped for coffee at a place where no one knew my face and didn't miss it. When I crossed into the new state, I said out loud, "You're here," so someone would. By the time I reached my new apartment, taller windows, quieter neighbors, a kitchen that believed in second chances, the sun was slipping behind a row of sycamores. I sat on the floor among boxes and waited for my phone to demand I justify myself. It didn't. The silence wasn't hostile, it was habitual. I was the reliable one, remember? Reliable people don't need checking on. They just keep showing up until the day they don't, and even then it takes a while to notice the chair's empty. On Friday evening, my father forwarded a link to an article titled, "Managing Conflict Around Weddings." No greeting, no context. The subtext was fluorescent. Your sister's big day is coming. Be useful, be quiet. I stared at the sender line, Richard Marlowe, and felt a small part of me laugh. I was 2 states away, and he was still sending instructions, still assuming proximity he hadn't earned. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote across the top, "The quiet exit." Beneath it, a list. Tuesday, crossed a state line, wasn't missed. Wednesday, built a bookshelf, built a spine. Thursday, learned the route to the market, learned the taste of choosing. Friday, father sent advice, noted, declined, kept breathing. Later, as I washed paint from my hands after correcting the previous tenant's devotion to mustard yellow, my phone lit with a rare text from Evelyn. "Proud of you for doing hard things, Ellie girl. Call me when you're settled. Bring me a photo of your new view." I sent her a picture of the sycamores, their leaves the exact color of her button jar. When I turned the lights off that first week, the room didn't feel lonely. It felt like an honest room. One that didn't ask me to shrink before it could love me back. I fell asleep with the windows cracked and the night coming in like proof. No one asked where I'd gone. No one noticed enough to notice. That used to break me. Now it began to steady me. Because if a person can leave a place and the place doesn't flinch, it means the gravity you've been obeying was never real. It was theater. And Tuesday is an excellent day for ending a performance. I didn't know then that my exit would become the first thread tugged loose from my sister's perfect tapestry. Or that the same family who didn't notice me moving would soon insist I return to complete a picture I had finally walked out of. For now, there was the quiet mercy of boxes, a page with lines waiting, and a room learning my name by the sound of my breathing. Settling into my new apartment should have been a fresh start, but the echo of my family's silence followed me like a draft under a closed door. It wasn't just that they didn't check in. It was the way their absence felt like routine. I could vanish for days, weeks, even years, and the Marlowes would go on applauding Vanessa's rehearsed brilliance as though nothing was missing. My grandmother Evelyn was the only one who noticed. She called when she could, her voice careful but sharp as ever. "You can't let them pretend you're invisible, Ellie girl," she told me once. "If they refuse to see you, then you make sure you see yourself." Her words stitched me back together on nights when the loneliness pressed too hard. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life played out like a highlight reel. Her social media was a parade of designer brunches, champagne flutes clinking under art, filters of gold, and captions about how dreams come true when you refuse negativity. I knew those captions weren't written for strangers. They were aimed squarely at me. The real blow landed a few months later. An ivory envelope arrived in the mail, my parents' address printed neatly in the return corner. For a split second, I thought maybe they'd finally reached out to me, that perhaps they wanted to bridge the gap. My heart even stumbled, betraying hope I thought I'd buried. Inside was a wedding invitation, not mine. Not Evelyn's milestone birthday. Vanessa's. Vanessa Marlowe and Daniel Aldridge request the honor of your presence. I scanned every line, my throat tightening. Nowhere was my name. Not on the RSVP card. Not in the family section. Instead, I recognized the handwriting on the outer envelope. My mother's careful script. Proof that they had known my new address all along. Proof they had chosen to use it not to check on me. Not to say they missed me, but to make sure I knew I wasn't invited. I called Evelyn immediately. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her, her silence crackled through the line. They didn't even try to hide it, she asked finally, her voice shaking with anger. No, I whispered. It was deliberate, a performance without me ruining the frame. Evelyn sighed, heavy as stone. Then let them have their performance. A show without truth always collapses. Days turned into weeks, and still no one from my family called. No explanation, no apology, nothing but carefully curated updates that trickled through cousins and distant relatives. The color of the bridesmaids' dresses, the menu choices, the seating chart. Each detail a reminder that I was excluded by design. It wasn't just absence anymore, it was erasure. Yet as the wedding planning consumed them, something else began to stir in me. The hurt was sharp, yes, but behind it simmered something sturdier. A refusal. If they could build an entire world without me, then I could build one without them. I poured myself into work, drawing up campaigns that earned praise from colleagues who actually saw me. I went out with Tessa and Lila, who never let me sit in silence too long. I filled my notebooks with new entries, columns of facts, feelings, and the kind of clarity you only get when you've stopped waiting to be chosen. By the time the wedding date loomed closer, I realized something extraordinary. Their stage might be set without me, but my absence was going to echo louder than my presence ever had. And for once, I was ready to let it. The weeks leading up to Vanessa's wedding unfolded like a silent storm, distant thunder I couldn't see, but I could feel it vibrating through the air. Every cousin's post, every tagged photo of cake tastings and dress fittings, came at me like an echo from a world I had been written out of. I didn't ask for updates, yet they arrived uninvited, slipped into my inbox or whispered down the grapevine. Vanessa chose the cathedral downtown. Vanessa's bridal shower was at the country club. Vanessa looked radiant at her engagement photos. It wasn't news. It was theater reviews for a play I'd never auditioned for. One Saturday morning, my father called, not to ask how I was doing, not to invite me to join, but to say, "It would be best if you didn't cause tension by showing up unannounced. Your sister deserves a day without complications." His voice was clipped, managerial, like I was a scheduling conflict, not his firstborn. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear, staring at the sycamores outside my apartment window. "So I'm not invited," I said, needing to hear it plain. "Not this time, Elena," he replied. "Let her shine." As if I'd ever been allowed to dim her glow. That night, I spread Vanessa's wedding invitation on my kitchen counter. The embossed roses caught the light like they were laughing at me. I thought of all the times I had been told to be mature, be supportive, be the strong one. Strong, in my family's dictionary, had always meant silent. But silence hadn't spared me. Silence had erased me. I called my mother next, needing some part of me to believe she might waver. She answered with her usual airy tone, already tired. "Darling, don't make this harder than it is. Weddings are complicated. Seating charts, expectations, it's all very political. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my family had grown so comfortable with my absence that they no longer considered it cruelty. It was simply convenience. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The apartment didn't press against me like my childhood bedroom had. Here, the walls didn't whisper that I was lesser. They simply waited for me to decide what kind of voice I wanted to fill them with. The following weekend, I visited Evelyn. She sat in her favorite chair, sunlight painting her silver hair gold. When I told her everything, her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "They think you're the shadow, Elena," she said softly. "But shadows prove light exists. Don't forget, you've been carrying it all along." Her words settled deep. For years I had begged for a seat at their table, but Evelyn was right. Maybe the table had never been mine to begin with. Maybe it was time to build a new one. I left her house that evening with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My family's erasure wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something I could shape myself. As the wedding date drew closer, I realized my absence would say more than any speech I could deliver. And unlike them, I didn't need gold-embossed invitations to prove my worth. I already knew it. The wedding wasn't the only performance Vanessa was curating. Around the same time, whispers from colleagues began reaching me. Small comments dropped. In emails or during coffee with old contacts. "Your sister's firm is doing big things. Didn't you pitch something like that years ago?" At first, I brushed it off. Vanessa had always borrowed pieces of my voice. As kids, she repeated my jokes until people forgot I'd said them first. In college, she recycled my essay's phrasing for her presentations, soaking up praise for original thought. But this time, the borrowing wasn't harmless. It was theft with a price tag. One afternoon, Tessa sent me a link. "You need to see this," her message read. It was a glossy article from a business magazine, featuring none other than Vanessa Marlowe. The headline hailed her as a rising star in communication strategy. I skimmed through the interview, my stomach tightening with each paragraph. There they were, lines I had written in graduate school papers, frameworks I had drafted late at night for my internships, metaphors so distinct I could recognize them as clearly as my own handwriting. She hadn't just borrowed my ideas. She'd built her professional reputation on them. I set my phone down and walked to the window, the sycamores swaying in the late afternoon breeze. Rage didn't come right away. What came first was disbelief. After everything, after ignoring my move, excluding me from her wedding, she still found a way to use me. My absence wasn't enough. She needed my words to fill her silence. That evening, I called Evelyn. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the anger simmering beneath it. "Elena," she said firmly, "you've kept records, haven't you?" I had. Notebooks stacked neatly on my shelves, filled with dates, drafts, and receipts of where my work began. Evelyn's reminder made me realize something important. Vanessa might have stolen the spotlight, but I had the truth. At work the next day, I stayed late, poring over files. Each time I compared Vanessa's published words to my original drafts, the overlap was undeniable. Side by side, the theft was obvious, but I didn't rush to expose her. No, screaming in outrage would only make me look bitter. Vanessa thrived on painting me as dramatic, difficult, unstable. Instead, I began to plan, quietly, methodically. Lila joined me for coffee that weekend. When I showed her the comparisons, she whistled low. "You could ruin her with this." "I don't want to ruin her," I said, surprising even myself. "I want her to ruin herself. All I need to do is stop protecting her." Lila leaned back, eyes narrowing with admiration. "That's colder than revenge. That's justice." As Vanessa's wedding date drew near, so did the magazine's buzz. Cousins reposted the article. My parents beamed about their brilliant younger daughter, and friends from long ago messaged me as if Vanessa's success somehow reflected on me. I didn't reply. Instead, I added another entry in my notebook, underlined twice. The truth always has a witness. For the first time, I felt calm. Because while Vanessa walked into her wedding rehearsals dripping in praise, I was building something far stronger than applause. I was building the story she couldn't steal, mine. The closer Vanessa's wedding drew, the louder the noise around it became. My parents' emails shifted from clipped reminders to subtle commands. It would be good optics if you didn't post anything that weekend, my father wrote. My mother added, try not to bring up work when relatives ask how you're doing. Vanessa deserves the spotlight. Spotlight, always the spotlight. It was as though my entire existence had been rebranded as an interruption, a shadow threatening their Golden Girls glow. The invitations kept arriving on my social media feed. Photos of bridal showers, champagne toasts. Vanessa's white silk dress hung against a sunlit window. Friends tagged her with hashtags about forever and dream days. My own phone remained empty of direct contact, as if I had been officially written out of the script. And then came the call I'd been dreading but expecting. Vanessa herself. Her voice was syrupy at first. Rehearsed politeness layered over ice. Elena, I wanted to reach out personally. It's not that I don't want you at my wedding. It's just, we decided it would be better if the day stayed drama-free. You understand, right? I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. Drama-free, I repeated. Is that what you call erasing your sister? She sighed, the kind of sigh that implied she was the victim. You always make things about you. This is my moment. If you love me, you'll let me have it. For years, those words had kept me tethered. If you love me, you'll let me. Fill in the blank with sacrifice, silence, invisibility. But this time, the thread snapped. No, Vanessa, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. If you loved me, I wouldn't have to disappear for you to shine. The silence on the line was sharp, brittle. Then she hung up. That night, I stared at her invitation still pinned to my fridge. Not because I was planning to go, but because it had become a symbol. A proof of absence written in embossed gold. I took it down, folded it once, and slid it between the pages of my notebook. Underneath I wrote, a chair can be missing without breaking the table, but a missing truth breaks the whole feast. The wedding day arrived like any other Saturday for me. No gown, no aisle, no family photo waiting for me to stand in the background. Instead, I walked through the city with Tessa and Lila, sipping coffee and laughing about nothing important. When Tessa snapped a picture of me against a mural, I almost told her not to post it. But then I thought, why not? The caption she wrote, some people get erased from the wrong story so they can finally write the right one. By evening, my phone buzzed with messages from distant relatives. Where are you? Your parents said you weren't invited. Why? It didn't feel right without you there. For once, their whispers weren't directed against me. They were questions aimed at the hollow Vanessa had tried so hard to hide. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My absence was speaking louder than any toast I could have given. And for the first time, I felt it. Power not in being present, but in choosing not to play their part. The morning after Vanessa's wedding, I woke to a string of unread messages. Some were from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, others from acquaintances who'd attended the ceremony. Each message had the same undertone, confusion. It didn't feel right without you there. Your sister seemed off. She cried during the reception. Your parents avoided questions about you all night. I scrolled through them slowly, a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow pooling in my chest. Vanessa had worked tirelessly to create an illusion of perfection, but illusions fracture under the weight of what they try to hide. Tessa called before I could even put the phone down. Her voice was gleeful, almost conspiratorial. You would have loved it, Elena. Half the wedding was whispering about you. They couldn't understand why you weren't there. And when someone brought up that magazine article, oh, Vanessa practically turned to stone. I stilled. The article? Yes, Tessa said, lowering her voice even though we weren't in the same room. One of the guests works in publishing. She mentioned how some of Vanessa's lines sounded familiar. Guess who she compared them to? You. My pulse quickened. For weeks I'd kept quiet, holding on to my notebooks, comparing Vanessa's so-called original strategies to my drafts. I thought silence was my only weapon. But now, other people were beginning to notice on their own. That night, I opened the notebook I had titled The Quiet Exit. Beneath my earlier entries, I drew 2 columns, one with Vanessa's published words, the other with my originals. Side by side, the theft was undeniable. Even the metaphors matched, phrases so distinct they couldn't be coincidence. Lila came over with takeout, dropping cartons of noodles on my coffee table. "You could bury her with this," she said, flipping through the pages. "But I get the sense you're not going to fling it all at once, are you?" "No," I said, closing the notebook carefully. That's what she'd expect, an outburst, something she could spin as bitterness. "I don't need to explode. I just need to stop shielding her." Lila smirked. "Cold, I like it." The following week, I was invited to speak at a small industry seminar. Nothing glamorous, just a local event for communications professionals. I hadn't planned on attending, but something in me shifted. When I stood on that stage and shared my ideas, the same ones Vanessa had twisted for her own gain, the audience leaned forward, engaged, alive with questions. They weren't applauding a shadow, they were applauding me. Afterward, one of the attendees approached. "Funny," she said. "Some of those points sounded a lot like what your sister was quoted saying in that article." I smiled faintly, careful not to give too much away. "Maybe she and I read the same books," I replied. But inside, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. Back home, I wrote a new line in my notebook. Truth doesn't need a megaphone. It needs time, and time was on my side. Vanessa had built her crown out of stolen gold. All I had to do was wait for the weight of it to break her neck. A week after the wedding, I sat in a small cafe near my office, notebook open, pen tapping absently against the page. I wasn't writing that day, I was listening. A pair of women at the next table were flipping through a glossy magazine spread, the one that had featured Vanessa weeks earlier. Their voices carried easily over the hum of the espresso machine. "Did you hear some of this wasn't even her work?" one said, lowering her voice like it was a scandal. "Apparently, her sister's in the same field. People are saying Vanessa lifted half her stuff." My pulse steadied. It wasn't anger this time. It was something quieter, sharper, vindication. The whispers had escaped the private corners of my life and slipped into the open. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't made a scene. Truth was doing the work for me. I sipped my coffee, smiled faintly, and scribbled in my notebook. They noticed now, without me pushing. That evening, I received a call from Evelyn. "Word's getting around," she said simply. "Your aunt phoned me in shock. She always thought Vanessa was the genius child. I told her what I've known all along, that Vanessa has always had you to lean on. Without you, she leans into lies." Her voice trembled with pride. "I just want you to remember, Elena. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest voice in the room." I pressed the phone to my ear, closing my eyes. "I know, Grandma. I'm starting to believe it. At work, I noticed a shift too. Colleagues who once casually mentioned Vanessa with admiration now rolled their eyes at her name. One even pulled me aside after a meeting. "Funny thing," he said with a smirk. "Vanessa's firm pitched a proposal last week. Half the content sounded like a weaker version of what you presented here months ago. People are starting to compare." That night, over dinner with Tessa and Lila, I finally allowed myself to laugh. Tessa raised her glass in a mock toast. To Vanessa, may she trip over her own stolen crown. Lila leaned in, eyes glittering. And to Elena, for proving you don't need to burn bridges when the truth sets the whole house alight on its own. I walked home under a sky dusted with stars, the city quiet around me. For years, I had begged for recognition from people who refused to see me. Now, without a single scream or plea, the truth was pulling me into focus while Vanessa's glow dimmed under scrutiny. When I unlocked my apartment and set down my bag, I paused at the notebook on my table. I opened it, added one line, and underlined it twice. My absence is louder than her presence, and for the first time, I believed it completely. It started with one rumor, then another. By the second week after the wedding, Vanessa's glossy image had begun to tarnish. A client she boasted about suddenly pulled their contract. A colleague from her firm hinted online about unethical practices. Screenshots circulated quietly, side by side. Her magazine interview and a seminar clip of mine from years earlier. The comparison needed no explanation. I didn't post them. I didn't whisper them into circulation. They simply found their way out, like water through cracks in a dam. One evening, I received a message from a distant cousin. It was strange at the wedding without you, and now? People are asking questions. I hope you're okay. For what it's worth, I always thought you were the steady one. I smiled faintly at the screen. Steady. That word used to feel like a consolation prize, the label they gave me to excuse forgetting me. Now it felt like a throne built on stone instead of paper. Meanwhile, Vanessa scrambled. Her social media, once flooded with champagne toasts and curated elegance, became defensive. Long captions about how haters can't handle strong women. Photos reposted 3 times in a week with slight edits, as though perfection might distract from suspicion. Tessa caught one of those posts and texted me immediately. She's cracking. You can see it in her eyes. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stood at my window, the sycamores swaying like quiet sentinels outside. For years, I would have killed for Vanessa to stumble, for my parents to finally admit they'd been blind. But now, watching her trip over her own lies didn't feel like victory. It felt like distance, like proof that her story and mine were no longer tethered. That weekend, Evelyn invited me over for tea. She poured it into the delicate china cups she'd had since before I was born. Her hands steady despite the years. You've carried yourself with grace, she said. I worried you'd try to fight them on their stage. But you built your own, and look, the audience found you anyway. Her words sank deep, anchoring me in a way applause never had. When I got home that night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "She can keep the crown. I'll keep the truth. One slips, the other stands." And for the first time, I felt the last strands of envy snap away. Because Vanessa's crown wasn't mine to steal or break. It was hers to lose. And she already was. The storm around Vanessa swelled, but I didn't chase the headlines. I had no need to. Instead, I began pouring myself into something that had been waiting quietly inside me for years, my own work, my own vision. I launched a small consultancy, nothing grand at first, a website built late at night, a handful of clients who trusted me because they'd seen my clarity in boardrooms before. But as weeks turned into months, my reputation spread, not for sparkle or showmanship, but for substance, for strategies that worked, for stories that didn't need stealing to shine. The first time a new client said, "I came to you because someone warned me away from your sister," I didn't flinch. I just nodded, professional, and wrote their needs in my notebook. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was peace, proof that truth, once free, knows where to land. In the middle of this new chapter, I leaned more on the people who had never treated me like a shadow. Tessa became my sounding board, Lila my anchor, Evelyn my compass. My grandmother's pride was quiet but fierce. "You're finally planting in soil that belongs to you," she said one evening, her hand warm over mine. "And look how you grow." I realized then that family wasn't about who shares your blood. It was about who showed up when you didn't have to ask. And around my table, I had built a circle of people who saw me, not as a prop or a problem, but as a person. Meanwhile, the Marlowes, my parents, my sister, tried reaching out in small ways. A text from my father, "Hope you're doing well." A voicemail from my mother, "Your sister is having a hard time. Maybe you could talk to her." Each message was a thread thrown across a gap they had widened for years. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but out of choice. For too long, I had been the one to stitch broken seams. This time, I let them unravel. One evening, as I walked home under street lamps glowing pale against the pavement, I felt something profound settle over me. My absence from their table no longer ached. It had become my greatest power. Because in stepping away, I hadn't lost a family, I had gained myself. At home, I wrote one final line in my notebook that night. they didn't notice when I left. But now they notice that I'm gone, and that is enough. The winter after Vanessa's wedding arrived quiet and steady, the way real change does. Snow blanketed the city, muffling the streets, softening the world into something that looked new. I sat at my desk by the tall windows of my apartment, notebook open, pen poised. This time, though, I wasn't writing lists of wrongs or receipts of betrayal. I was writing beginnings, plans for new projects, ideas for clients, small fragments of a book I wanted to publish one day, pages that belonged entirely to me. My consultancy had grown faster than I expected. Calls came from companies I'd once only dreamed of working with. They wanted my voice, my clarity, my vision, not as an echo of someone else, but as the source. Each new contract, each signed agreement felt like bricks laid on a foundation that was mine, alone. Sometimes, news of Vanessa still drifted in. A cousin mentioned she had lost another client. A colleague whispered that her firm's reputation was faltering. Even my parents left the occasional message, thinly veiled pleas. Your sister misses you. Family should stay united. Can't you forgive? But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about releasing its hold on me. And I already had. One evening, Evelyn sat across from me at my kitchen table, sipping tea from her favorite cup. She looked around my apartment, the plants thriving on the sill, the shelves lined with notebooks, the air alive with the hum of a life finally claimed. You built your own table, she said softly. And you filled it with people who know your worth. That's all I ever wanted for you. Her words stitched something closed inside me. For years, I had begged for a chair at my family's table. But the truth was clear now. The missing chair wasn't mine. It was theirs. The chair they left empty by refusing to see me, by pretending I didn't belong. And that empty space will haunt them long after I've stopped looking for it. On New Year's Eve, Tessa and Lila came over. We ate, laughed, and toasted to the year ahead. At midnight, Adrian, now more than my fiancé, now my partner in every sense, pulled me close on the balcony, fireworks bursting over the skyline. To Elena, he said, to the life you chose, to never begging for a seat again. The cheers, the laughter, the clink of glasses. It was louder and truer than any family celebration I'd ever known. I opened my notebook the next morning and wrote my last entry under the title, The Quiet Exit. Leaving wasn't the end, it was the beginning. My silence was never weakness, it was power. And in the end, the loudest revenge was living a life they can't erase. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf among the others, and smiled. The story they tried to write me out of was never mine to begin with. This one was.